So something great's going to happen this week. Some of us are maybe going to gain a pound or two, which means that it is time for my annual Thanksgiving sermon. I do this as a tradition. So traditionally, I'll say something about, yay, Thanksgiving is coming, and we'll think about these owls for just a moment. I'm not really sure why. And, we'll reflect on the beginnings of the country and the beginnings of great traditions like eating together. In this picture, this guy here in black, well, the thing's pointing up to you, but this guy in black, you see he's holding up bunny ears behind the guy sitting next to him. That's beginning the tradition of holding up bunny ears in pictures. It's a little known fact that that's where that... Moving on, and there, traditionally I remind you that you're going to eat a great meal, and you're going to remember that eating the number of plates that you are old is not a good idea. It's going to hurt a little bit, and then you'll waddle out. And by the way, is that spaghetti with cherries and 2 leaves sticking out of it? I'm pretty sure that's what that is, because that's what we have on our tables, right? It's the traditional spaghetti with cherries and a couple of leaves dish. What is that? Sweet potatoes? I'm pretty sure that's spaghetti with cherries and leaves. But anyway, and then we get down and we sit down for the traditional hockey. Man, I always remind you that I'm kidding. I know it's not hockey, but then and same joke every year, right? Yeah, okay. Wow. I got nothing. And then, every year at Thanksgiving, I remind us that what we do as an American people is to take a moment and reflect with gratitude on the things that we have. We think about our homes and our cars and our jobs and the income that we have. And hopefully at some point we think of more significant things like family. And I'm not sure why, but Batman approves. Don't know why that's there. It made sense in my office. We'll move on. And then we have the traditional Thanksgiving text about God tearing us apart and with none to deliver us from His hand. Yeah, what? No, but really, this year, I'd like for us to take a moment and reflect on Psalm 50. If you have your Bibles and you want to open it up, Psalm 50 will actually help us to think about gratitude as it relates to our salvation. This is a song that the Hebrew people sang. The tune of the song is lost to us now. We don't know what it is, and so it's kind of become a prayer. But I think it's worth remembering before we head into these words, that what do you do with a song? Well, you sing it, right? And what does that do? Well, that sends those words deep into your heart to the point that your mind calls it out when you're bored, when you're doing something menial. You've got some task in front of you, and you got to put this together in the assembly line. While you're doing that, you'll have this hymn going on in your head. Well, this is one of Israel's. And what that means is that this was so important to their theology, to their understanding of God, that they wanted to sing about it, and they wanted this in their hearts. And what is this? Well, we would be more familiar with what's going on in Psalm chapter 50 as it comes to us from the words of Jesus, when He talks about on the great last day, when He will separate the sheep and the goats. This is a song of judgment. It is a song about the final judgment. And why do they sing it? Well, they wanted to be ready. They knew that great day was coming at some point. And so in their worship, when they would get together and they would sing, they wanted at least one of their 150 songs, and there's more than just this one, to focus them on the reality that God was going to assess them. That at some point they would have to stand before the judgment throne of God. Well, that's pretty central to our belief system too, right? We all anticipate that coming day. It's a fearful thing to think about, and a wondrous thing to think that I'm not ready, but I have been made ready. That someone else has prepared me. That He took what I could never get ready for, and He took it all on Himself so that I might be prepared to stand here. Well, this song is about that. How about how do I be prepared to stand on that great day? What will it be like? In Psalm 50 begins with the Mighty One. God the Lord speaks, and He summons the earth from the rising of its sun to its setting. Out of Zion, the perfect beauty of God shines forth. What's going on here? Well, from the rising of the sun to its setting, He says, all day long, God cries out to the people, gather. It's time. The last day is upon us. It's time to gather. And what does He say? God comes. He does not keep silence. Before Him is a devout fire, around Him a mighty tempest. He calls in the heavens above and to the earth that He may judge His people. Gather to me, my faithful ones, who have made covenant with me by sacrifice. The heavens declare His righteousness, for God Himself is a judge. So the picture in this song, and they're painting it with some beauty, right, is this great and mighty God against whom none can stand. All this power. Can you stand before a thunderstorm? No, you can't. Can you stand before the tsunami? No, you can't. And can you stand before this God unless He says you can? No, you can't. He comes with this raging tempest, this devouring fire. It's a terrifying image. And He calls out and He says, come, stand before me. Come, my faithful ones. It's worth noticing the thing He begins with is, I hope, us, right? My faithful ones, come. And so He's calling us before Him. It's a wondrous and dreadful picture, right? God Himself comes as judge. Now, how do you be ready for that? How do you get ready for the judgment of God? Well, I think we all know the answer, right? The answer is, you turn to Jesus Christ. Except in Jesus Christ, there is no being ready when God is your judge. Because all of us have blown it, right? Every one of us have gone our own way. And the Lord has laid on Him the iniquity of us all. So the way to be prepared for salvation is in Jesus Christ. But there's something that we're going to hear from this song today. Obviously, this song is sung well before the coming of Christ. There's an element to being ready with Jesus that is going to be looked at here that our culture is celebrating this week. And that has to do with gratitude. He says, hear, O Israel, and I will speak. Or hear, O my people, and I will speak. O Israel, and I will testify against you. For I am God, your God. He says, I've got a bone to pick with you folks. And what is that bone? Well, there are some things that it's not. He says, you who come, you faithful ones, who make sacrifice, you come. It's not for your sacrifices that I rebuke you. It's not for worship. It's not for your burnt offerings are constantly before me. He says, I know you're doing that well. And He would say to us, it's not for gathering and singing and offering your gift and then taking the meal and listening to a sermon and praying. It's not for that I would rebuke you. He'd say, you're doing that well. Look at you. You're here. You have a constant life of worship, right? And He says, I don't have a problem with that. But it's interesting, what we're about to hear, what we hear next, is something that we hear from God over and over and over again. And that is, He doesn't need this. It's not like His ego requires you to sing about how good He is. He's not sitting around going, am I a good person? Would someone please tell me I'm good? And so a group gets together and says, yes, God, you're good. And He goes, oh, well, that's a relief. He says, I don't need that. And He says this several times in the Old Testament. I will not accept a bull from your house. I don't want it. You make covenant with me by sacrifice. I don't want your bull. I don't need your goat. Leave that in your folds. I don't need it. I don't want it. He says, for every beast of the forest is mine, the cattle on 1,000 hills. Now that phrase is weird to us because most of us are not ranchers and we don't own 1,000 cows, much less the cows on 1,000 hills. That's wealth is what that is. In the ancient world, to have 10 cows would be doing all right. to have 1,000 cows doing great. 1,000 hills full of cows? He's saying, I am so rich you can't imagine. I am richer than Donald Trump. Okay, I'm doing all right. And so I don't need you. He says, I know the birds of the hills, and all that moves in the field is mine. I own the patent on it all. It all belongs to me. So you think you come to your worship and you're doing something that's good for me? I don't need it. He says, if I were hungry, I would not tell you. I don't depend on you as the source for my sustenance. I'm doing okay without you. For the world and its fullness are mine. Do I eat the flesh of bulls or drink the blood of goats? And what's God doing here? Well, He's critiquing their worship. He's saying, do not make the mistake of thinking that by worshiping me, you put me in your debt. That you worship me enough times and you come to the right number of assemblies and I owe you heaven. That is not the way that it works. And so they've gathered together. He will owe us if we keep the covenant idea. He's saying, no, that isn't how it works. And there are people who approach their salvation in Christianity in just this way. I got dunked in that water. I did the right acts during worship. And those are the important things. That's the stuff that matters. Since I did those things, now God owes me. It's the same attitude as this. And God would say, I don't owe you anything. If you really want what I owe you, invest in asbestos, because you're going to need it. No, you don't want what I owe you. You do not want this attitude in your heart. Because when this creeps up in our hearts, when we lose sight of our gratitude to God, then our worship becomes a dead thing, an empty thing, a thing that we do by rote, or worse, a manipulative thing, a controlling thing, a thing that we try and pull God's blessings down from heaven by doing this. You can't. And if that's what you're doing, stop. I want our attendance to go up, honestly. But I'd rather it went down than have you sit here with this in your heart. You don't want this. God looks at their worship and He says, I don't need that. I don't need your adoration. Not like this. Don't do it. The truth is, we cannot manipulate God. He is beyond our controlling. And He does not need us. We need Him. We do this because He knows that we need to adore Him. That our lives go sideways when we don't. He calls us here so that He might bless us. So that He might draw near to us and show His love for us and redirect and reorder our lives. That's why we need this. Not so we can control Him, but so we can submit to His control. That's why we live in this rhythm. Look, He was perfectly content with His existence before He created. God has within Himself everything that He needs in order to have a very happy existence. He doesn't need us. He chooses us. And when we approach worship as if there's something that's lacking in God, we've lost sight of who He is. Here's the key. And twice in this psalm He's going to say this. Offer to God a sacrifice of thanksgiving. He's already said, I don't want your bull. What does He want? Thanksgiving. I want you to be grateful to me. I want you, God says, to realize that I am a real person and treat me like a real person. That the things that I have done in history are real and true. And the things that I've done in your life are real and true. And I want you to think about those and worship me because I'm good. Offer me your thanksgiving. Be grateful for who I am. And then you'll be able to do this, perform your vows to the Most High. A person who lives in a grateful relationship with God lives differently. They actually carry out what they said. And He says, if you do that, you'll call upon me in the day of trouble, and I will deliver you, and you will glorify me. That our salvation, well, of course it rests within Christ Jesus. And of course it has something to do with baptism and the Lord's Supper and regular worship. the thing that makes all of these operative is a genuine heart towards God. That a heart that is turned toward God in gratitude then gets to see God rescue and save them. That it doesn't think, well, I got wet, so you owe me. No, I got blessed. Thank you, God. Gratitude is at the foundation of us experiencing and genuinely knowing our salvation. These are the only things that we can... This is really the only thing that we can offer to God. Everything that you own is not yours. You have it for a time. You've leased existence. You've got property that's under your control. But it doesn't belong to you. Not really. So if you give your money back, you're only giving God what was already His. If you give your food to the poor, great. But it's God providing for them, not you. You got to participate in God's action. When we offer things, remember, every single thing is a creation of God. It belongs to Him. As He said, the cattle on 1,000 hills are His, and that includes your hills. It includes your bank accounts. It all belongs to Him. But gratitude? See, He could make you a robot and force you to say thanks, but He doesn't, does He? He doesn't. The only thing that you genuinely have that is yours to give to God is your love and your song and your gratitude. And when you give that to Him, He receives it. He receives it. He loves that. And that is how He leads us into the ways of salvation. Because it's a real, true relationship. It's genuinely saying thanks to a real person. Treating God as good and worthy. Not trying to manipulate Him or force Him into a place where He can do good things for you. Not treating Him like a genie whose lamp that you can... But as somebody that you admire and love, and you've seen that He's good, and you tell Him, thanks. This is the pathway of salvation. That's what the psalm is saying. But to the wicked, God says. Now, when something like that shows up, we should probably pay attention to it. Because what He's about to show us is the failure of thanksgiving and what it looks like. So that we can know and we can assess our own lives and we can say, is this creeping up in me? Does this inability to have a loving heart toward God that says thanks, is that in me? So, but to the wicked, God says, what right have you to recite my statutes or take my covenant upon your lips? Now, the thing I want to point out here is that these people worship God. These are worshiping folks, the wicked. It's not they're wicked because they're out there in the world and they're living the way of the world. No, they're here sitting with you. You know, sometimes it's even me, right? And do we ever blow it? Yeah. And what's going on here? God says they're reciting it. But what right do they do? How dare you, God says. What right do you have to call upon me? What right do you have to sing these songs? What right do you have to come here? Well, how do I know if that's me? Those are scary words. Well, here's what's going to show up in our life when we lose sight of gratitude with God. You hate discipline. You cast my words behind you. If you see a thief, you're pleased with him, and you keep company with adulterers. What's going on there is He's saying, you are rejecting of my way of life. You are sinning against God and His covenant. When it talks about thieves and adulterers, those are 10 commandments, folks. Those are things that people are rebelling against the 10 commandments. And He's saying, your heart's on the side of them. And that's used more generally to say, you aren't living my lifestyle. You don't honor me with the way that you live. If you're living wickedly, then your heart is sinning against God. And that's going to begin the moment you lose track of your gratitude. You begin to take presumption upon God and say, He'll forgive me anyway. And this lackadaisical attitude, we don't ever get to this place on purpose. People drift into the place where they say, I can hold on to this grudge and it doesn't matter. I can hate and I don't care. None of it matters because Jesus died for me and that's what matters. And the thing is, there's just enough truth there to be a real trap. To keep us stuck in the place where we're saying, well, I hate discipline. He says, you give your mouth free rein for evil, and your tongue frames deceit. You sit and speak against your brother. You slander your own mother's son. What's that? Those are sins against our fellow humans. We become lackadaisical towards God when we lose our gratitude, and we also lose track of the fact that God expects us to be grateful for each other, and we'll start despising one another. You'll know this is happening to you because as you're leaving here, you can't wait to get to lunch so that you can talk about, can you believe that so-and-so said? I cannot believe how rude they were to me. Or you cherish the grudge that you have. And it may be weeks or months or years old, but you're real thrilled you've got it, even though it hurts you. You see, the fact of the matter is, you did not choose your siblings in this family any more than you did in your family of biological birth. God gave them to you. And you ought to be thankful for the people that are here. There's not one person here that you don't need, or God wouldn't have given them to you. And they will challenge you, and they will stretch you, and they will hurt you, and you need to say, thank you, God, that person is in my life. Thank you for the challenge. Thank you for the opportunity to practice discipleship, and thank you for them because I know that person bears your image too. But when we lose sight of our gratitude, boy, we get to this point where our mouth gets free rein. We talk one another down. We attack each other. Even our siblings in Christ, brothers and sisters, it ought not be. It says, these things you have done and I have been silent. You thought I was one like yourself. You thought I just was watching and didn't really notice. You thought I forgot after a couple of days because you forget after a couple of days. Nope. Remember, he's talking to the wicked now. And he says, but I rebuke you and I lay the charge before you. Mark this then, you who forget God, lest I tear you apart and there be none to deliver. Traditional Thanksgiving text. Because this is what happens when we lose our gratitude. We wander very quickly into very bad places. But when gratitude rests, it'll catch up with us. Because God will catch up with us. We don't outlive Him. And when He raises us from the dead, we do have to answer to Him. He said, but this, he says, the one who offers thanksgiving as his sacrifice. The psalm closes with these words of escape. The one who offers thanksgiving as his sacrifice glorifies me. The one who orders his way rightly, I will show the salvation of God. There is an escape from that wickedness. Turning to Christ Jesus with gratitude for what He has done is our way of escape. It is the foundation stone of everything that we are. We can't take it lightly. He gave Himself for us. He died for us. And so we begin in awe. How can you look at it in your mind's eye and not be moved with gratitude? Do not presume upon what Christ has done. Every time you come to this table, you remember the great cost that was paid for you. Every time you come to this building, you remember what has been done for you. In fact, in your own homes, when you rise from bed, every morning you remember the great cost. And you say thanks. Because that will help us to order our way rightly. Because when we're in gratitude to Jesus, we're willing to listen to Him. And His way of life we begin to hear, and that is the way of salvation. So a few last words about gratitude. It is our way to freedom. It is the open door. It is the one thing that God will not force out of us, and the one thing that we must give in everything that we do. God expects us then to order our lives rightly. Gratitude requires us to choose humility. Think about this for a minute. When you are grateful, what you are doing and saying is that what you have done for me, I could not do for myself. So thank you. I am beneath you right now. I am expressing that I didn't do this for me. You did. Even a parent who receives a gift from a child, and it's something that the child bought with the parent's money, and they receive that gift. Obviously, they could have bought the gift, but you can't buy the giving. Right? And when a parent sees the love that the child gives and they receive that, aren't you humbled by it? That's the nature of gratitude, is that it causes us to step down, to let our arrogance go. Arrogant people would much rather prove themselves than receive. They prefer the bitterness of their own accomplishments to the wonder of gratitude. Because gratitude forces you to be humble. Gratitude makes our worship relational rather than empty. When we worship God in a posture of gratitude, then what we're doing is we're saying, God, you are so very good. And you have been so very good to me. And I owe you this. I have to say thanks because I could never have done this myself. And suddenly our hearts engage. As opposed to the kind of, I've got to go through this. This is what I do every Sunday. No, when you suddenly wake up and say, God, you're good, you're good, you're good, thank you. Then our worship fills up with authentic reality. Gratitude towards God treats God like a real person. Because nobody is grateful to an idea. You're only grateful to a person who does something for you. And so God moves from the theoretical to the real when the heart engages like this. Gratitude towards God means we seek peace and reconciliation in all of our relationships. I cannot, on the one hand, be grateful to God and hateful to you. Can't do it. You remember a parable that Jesus told about a guy who had a huge debt, lifetime's worth of debt, and it's forgiven. And the guy's really grateful, and he goes out and he finds his fellow slave who owes him, about a third of a year's salary. It's not nothing, but it's not what he was forgiven, but he can't forgive it. He begins to choke the man. Well, the master's not thrilled, right? As I said a moment ago, you were given the church. The people of this church were given to you. You didn't pick them. You didn't choose them. Many of them you would have chosen, right? But maybe somebody here you would not have. Doesn't matter. That person's in your life on purpose. They're there to help you love God. And the challenging person is the person for whom you've got to be the most grateful. You've got to thank God for that person because that person helps you practice discipleship more than the person who just strokes your ego and you're really thrilled. Because you got to forgive them, right? You got to bear with them. You got to be patient with them. That's why God brings such wondrously different people together in church. So that we're different from one another and the rough edges rub against each other. It is gratitude to God for that person that will help you to love that person. This is particularly true also in families. Because in our families, we run more deeply into each other's sins than we do anywhere else. Things that can be hidden in public can't be hidden in family. You got to be grateful for the person who misbehaves, the person who hurts you, the person who lets you down. Because that person is given to you by God that you might practice love of the difficult person. Do you see how this is the way of salvation? And how when you lose your gratitude, When you stop saying thank you, you start to become bitter. In the broken world, that's how it works. And you start to go through worship by going through the motions, where you think, this is something that I do for God, and now He owes me. This is something I got to do for God to keep Him off my back. And all along, God looks at that kind of heart and that kind of attitude and says, oh, where are you? I want you. Where are you? Why are you so bitter? Why is your soul so turned down? Love me, I love you. But the heart that says thanks doesn't wander to those strange places. The heart that practices what we're going to do this week. This week we enter into Thanksgiving. The heart that practices that, it continues to worship and love God. This is the salvation of God. Becoming like God in His love. And the way to get there is to say, that person may be hard. Thanks. That person's really great. Thanks. And God, you have done wonderful things for me. Thanks. If you look into your own heart, how seriously do you practice the discipline of gratitude? How often do you gripe and complain? And how often do you say thanks? If you're taking stock right now and you're realizing that you are in a very bad place and you need the prayers of your brothers and sisters, let us know. We'll pray for you. And it may be that you came to this place this morning and nothing I've said has meant really anything, but you came with a burden on your life and you really need the prayers of the church. You need help to get through. If that's true, if that's you, let us know. If this morning you're subject to the invitation of God, why don't you come right now while we stand and sing?